to More to the Story. With me again today is Maki Aberfeld and Joe Murray. Today we want to take a look at what's taking place in the city of Portland. Portland police have been under siege. The city's been under siege for in excess of 90 days now. We have protesters that are still being labeled protesters who are doing nothing but causing violence, anarchy, destruction to the city of Portland. This has been allowed to happen, but worse yet, these protesters have now filed a lawsuit against the city and I believe the federal government in an attempt to get paid to buy protective equipment to wear while protesting against the police. Maki, let's begin with you. You found this article, this lawsuit.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about what's occurring in the bizarro world of Portland?
You know, I always say every day I think I've seen it all, and then I wake up and I see something that I have not seen yet. So the difference between the riot gear for the police and the riot gear for civilians, I don't think it's something we should really be even contemplating. The police are there as the arm of the government, local government, to preserve the peace, to maintain our democratic state of affairs, or so we want to believe. And then there are the individuals who are protesting under the guise of peaceful protesters, yet they say that they need military gear or police gear to be protected from the police. I don't even know where it's coming from, because when you claim that you are peaceful, and as far as I know, no police force, including the one in Portland, is going to do anything to you if you are peaceful, other than tell you move back or maybe move to another street or another location. If you don't comply, you're not peaceful anymore. So what does this mean? You violate the order from the police. Any criminal right now can say, okay, I'm entitled to wearing gear because if I resist arrest, I want to be protected from the police. So the story becomes surreal to the point that we really need to address it in a very serious way, because if this is going to be entertained in any shape or form, we are creating an environment that is beyond acceptable in any country, in any city, in any place of law and order. It's just the end of law and order as we know it. And then many people would say, we want the end of law and order as we know it, but they really don't know what they're talking about. Basically, it allows civilians to wear gear under the claim that the police are abusing them, and this is something that is accepted as a serious and not frivolous complaint.
Right.
A few months ago, it would be just dismissed as a frivolous claim. Today, it's entertained in a serious way. Again, you know, as somebody who looks at policing for so many years, I really don't know who will be the next police officer in this country. I just don't know.
Joe,
Scary,
as
very
an
scary.
attorney, A, does the case have merit, and why is this happening? Why do we have anarchists, which is what they really are? You know,
Exactly.
I think the term protester is being used really frivolously
Mislabeled,
throughout the
yeah.
country and is misleading the general public. So is there merit to this type of a lawsuit? Who's behind it, if you know? And how do you see a judge taking a look at this type of case?
All great questions, and I'm going to play devil's advocate because I haven't seen the lawsuit. This is just reported. We're just commenting on what's been reported. However, just playing devil's advocate, I'm going to say that if I was to bring a lawsuit like this, my clients would be peaceful protesters who are being lumped in with violent protesters and are going to, because today in the day of cell phones and video cameras, they're going to show some type of documentary evidence that they're not engaging any violence, but the police are taking physical action against them. So I'm anticipating that that's probably what they're arguing. Here's where it fails. First of all, we have in our courts, it has to be justiciable, meaning the the case has to be ripe. You can't speculate, okay, I'm going to do something, and I want to, in advance, have a ruling. The courts don't like to do that. They want an actual case in controversy where you're coming in and saying, on April 29th, we had a protest and I was there, and as a result of that, I suffered these damages. And that's what you would do under a federal civil rights action, a 1983 action. And here are the damages I suffered. This is speculative. What they're saying here is, in the event I do go to this protest, because nobody can guarantee they're going to be anywhere in the future, in the event I do go to this protest, I want to be able to arm myself with protective gear, gas mask, body armor, because I might, again speculating, I might be subject to some physical force exerted against me by the police. That's
Joe,
so
the
speculative.
back up is, if your clients were there as peaceful protests,
Right.
and this were happening, would it not be believable that peaceful protests would leave, that they would comply? If I'm here to peacefully protest, then I am a person who believes in law and order for the most part.
Exactly.
And police give an order for me to clear the street, so I would leave. I would not need this equipment.
You're 100% right, and as law enforcement, we understand that because we've responded to these protests, typical protests. And what happens? They go there and they're allowed to protest in a designated area for a designated time period. Sometimes even restricting them. If they want to carry signs, they can't have sticks on them. So we have rules that you have to follow.
The protesters in Portland, we have lasers being shined into
Yes.
police officers' eyes, causing blindness.
Blindness,
We have
yeah.
bottles being thrown, fires being set, days of trying to take over a federal courthouse. Now they shifted from the federal courthouse to a police station. Are they peaceful protesters?
No, and I think that what Joe said needs to be said again. When people say, I have the right to civil dissent, to protest,
Correct.
you have the right, but these rights are clearly defined.
Yeah.
You have to be in an area that is designated for this. You cannot just storm the city, storm the streets, disrupt the traffic, do whatever you feel like doing under the umbrella of civil dissent. And
Right.
this is almost unheard of right now in the media, that somebody steps up and says, hello, yes, we do have the right, but this right is clearly defined. And this gives
And it has
people,
limitations.
Absolutely, and this gives people some twisted idea that they can do whatever they want, use as much violence as they feel like, and all this is still
Protected.
protected
Yeah.
by the Constitution. It is not.
So
It is not.
over 90 days of protest in Portland, of what they call protest, but over 90 days of lighting fires, throwing
Yeah.
bottles,
Rioting,
Which
injuring
again,
call it.
people,
Are not lawful.
Right.
continues to happen on a daily basis.
Yes.
Why is it being allowed? The president sent in federal agents to protect the courthouse. There was an agreement made that the National Guard would protect the courthouse, that the law enforcement, state police would all protect the courthouse. And now the
Right.
courthouse is being protected, shifts over to a police station. Why is it still being allowed? These are not peaceful protests.
The primary role of government is to protect its citizens, to protect our society. That's our job.
Is the mayor of Portland protecting its
No,
citizens?
he's failing in that job, and that's
Why is that? Why do you think that is?
I think they're just like our mayor is acquiescence
I
to
didn't vote for
this.
this mayor de Blasio, so he may be your mayor.
Yeah, well,
but he's not my mayor.
he's our mayor. 'Cause I don't like when people say he's not my president. He is the president of the United States. He's all of our president. He's unfortunately our mayor, but I think just like our mayor is endangering our citizens and our officers by holding back the resources. And we've all been out there on patrol when these riots and civil disobedience occur. We have task force units that are trained to respond to that and deal with that. I watch video after video of this issue in the Bronx where A mob was closing in on a group of police officers. Where was the Rapid Response Task Force? Why aren't they deploying these units to support and supplement?
We're talking about the incident that happened 2 days ago.
Yeah. I don't want to jump over,
we
but
go back.
it's on the same note. When you
Right.
talk about the mayor of Seattle, not Portland, not taking appropriate action, this is being done, I think, by these socialist mayors and governors who are sympathetic to this movement of destroying our republic that are allowing this to
Are they
take place.
sympathetic, or is it that these mayors, these elected officials, being socialists, extreme left wing, or whatever, just totally incompetent, is that their core belief that they are truly socialists and this is their way of overthrowing government?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that they're simply incompetent. I saw on the news the other day some woman from Chicago advocating explicitly to loot stores, high-end stores in Chicago, saying that this is justified under the reparations theory, and she
have
encourages that will pay, the insurance will pay the stores, and she encourages her people to loot the stores. Now this is, I am not a lawyer, so you tell me. If I'm going out and advocating for violence of that nature, isn't it a criminal behavior?
It
The
is.
mayor of the city should have locked her up.
But is
And
that a
yet
question
she's
of
not doing
incompetence?
that.
I mean, then we have an epidemic, in addition to COVID, we have an epidemic of incompetence
Yes.
that's now spread into elected officials. Because we have the city of Chicago, where, violence is
Out of
occurring.
control.
The excuse that it's okay to steal because you're insured. We have Portland, we have Seattle. It seems to me that that's more than incompetence.
I think you're right, and there's a distinction between someone who's actually working towards the undermining and overthrowing of our government and someone who's just a moron. And we have that here in New York. I really do believe Governor Cuomo is, and I'm sorry to say this, as a professional, he's a moron. He's incompetent and a moron. Mayor de Blasio, on the other hand, he knows exactly what he's doing. He is all in on this socialist movement. He doesn't believe in our current Republican form of government and wants to undermine it, and he's taking steps to do so proactively. I think Cuomo is just different. The guy just is a clown. We can't take him seriously, and I think that's the incompetence you're talking about. But make no mistake about it, de Blasio is a socialist/communist.
Well, I totally agree with you on that. I think he's a socialist, but I also think he's a moron. So when you combine the two together,
Yeah, that's a dangerous
you have a moronic
combination.
socialist,
Right.
which is just making it worse. In the case, though, where we're seeing socialist elected officials, why is the public sitting silent?
The public is not sitting silent in the
Why are
sense
they
because
allowing it to happen?
I have to tell you, I was sitting the other day with a couple of my students in uniform. We were having lunch, and people were literally coming by and saying to them, "Thank you for what you're doing. We will write to the mayor. We are supporting you." I think that majority of people don't think that what's happening right now in New York is okay. But for whatever reason, they don't feel that they have the power and the voice to demand something different. They sort of think, okay, we'll wait it out, and partially I think it's related to COVID that made people, suddenly rethink different priorities in life, and they're grateful for the fact that they have food to eat and a place to sleep, and they don't.
But they
think beyond
will
that.
not have all of that.
Exactly, and
if
they
this
don't think beyond
continues.
it. They don't
They're on the
think.
verge of losing their ability
Everything.
to walk freely,
Yeah.
their ability to go shop in the stores they want,
Yeah.
just to walk down the street without being attacked and assaulted. They're a way of life that there's millions of people lined up to come to this country who want this way of life, and we have anarchists here who are trying to overthrow this way of life. So, you have this, then why do we have, if we're infested with moronic elected officials, why then do our police chiefs continue to follow down the path of blindness? Why do we have this in Portland and the police chief is not defying the mayor who, let's be honest, the chief took an oath to uphold the Constitution. What's occurring there is violating the Constitution. They're violating laws. And yet you're allowing your police department to sit back and do nothing. your cops to be injured, and you're following laws, you're following orders really from elected officials.
Nobody likes to be fired, right? And years ago, when I wrote my book on police leadership in the United States, I actually cited Chief O'Brien from Miami, who was fired overnight. It was the Gonzalez case, when he did
Sure.
not inform the mayor that the federal law enforcement is coming to get the child and give him back to his father in Cuba, and the mayor fired him, of course, the next day. And I wrote this back then saying, this is the leadership we need to see in police chiefs, in police commissioners. When they do things that are operationally sound, they are fired. This is the display of leadership and integrity.
And then they could stand against the mayor. They could sit back and say, I did this because you failed to do
Yes,
X, Y, and
absolutely.
Z.
And they would show the world, the people of the city, what integrity is. That policing is a profession. Police chiefs should be making operational decisions, not the mayors, not the governors. Nobody wants to do it because nobody wants to get fired.
If the police department
right?
in the city of Portland, if the police chief took his manpower and walked into their city hall and said, you're not running the show, we're running the show, this is our form of protest, you're being removed, are they breaking the law?
Listen, I
Yes.
think
Well,
yeah,
says
they
who?
are.
Yeah.
But you
Says
know
who?
what?
Because there is no law. There is no law.
There is no law.
There's
at
no
this
law.
point. When you look at what's
So,
happening
well,
around the
Let
country,
me address that because
there
I
is
think
no law.
that's a brilliant discussion that we need to have. Currently, under our system, the mayor is the elected official. He's the chief executive officer. Police officers are the arm of the executive body.
Correct.
He's the chief executive officer. Now, if I were to run for mayor, I would want the same thing because
Correct.
I'm accountable to the voters. So I want to be able to control.
But are you saying the voters want that type of city in Portland then?
I'm saying this mayor has his own agenda. That's what we're talking about with his
Okay,
socialist
but then there's no
mantra that he's-
accountability of that mayor to the voters.
Other jurisdictions have the ability to recall their elected officials if they feel they're stepping out or even acting illegally. The governor has the power in New York State to suspend him, just
Governor's not
like
gonna do
any
it.
one of us on the job. Suspend him for 30 days and have a hearing to remove him. I think it was Jimmy Walker was the last time that actually happened.
But in the absence of enforcement of laws, in the absence of defending the Constitution, upholding your oath, what happens if the police chief in Portland decides to take 50 police officers to go conquer City Hall and say, we're running the city, we're restoring law and order, and you're being removed and you'll be tried, through the governor or the courts?
Because it's unlawful. There's no legal
But isn't what's
remedy.
happening right now unlawful?
It is unlawful.
So
They
you
should-
have unlawfulness that is allowed to happen because lawfulness is allowing it to happen.
See, when I say it's unlawful, it's the police department doesn't have an obligation. And this is great because there
But
was
they
a
have an
lawsuit.
obligation to uphold the Constitution.
There was a lawsuit recently by a colleague of mine who filed it. I actually second sat her in the Court of Appeals. It was a mandamus action. The Jewish community has that ritual Kaporos, where they slaughter 50 or 60,000 live chickens in the streets. And it's part of a ritual. They swing it over the head, they confess their sins, and then they kill the chicken. Because of the health hazard, particularly now with COVID, it's like a live slaughter market. Particularly with that, there are numerous health code violations that are being violated, but the police, under the direction of the mayor, acquiesce and allow them to do it. They're
So
not
then we
enforcing
really are
law.
not a
But
nation
hold
of
on,
law and order,
hold
then,
on.
if we can break
So
it
there
along.
is a remedy. Article 78 has a writ. It's not a writ, but it's a provision that it's mandamus, to compel. You file this to move to compel the police to enforce the law. Because one of the provisions is actually like our domestic violence. There's no discretion. It's mandatory. So she filed this and challenged it all the way up to the Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals made a decision that police action is essentially discretionary. The allocation, they don't have to make arrests for every single crime.
But in the state of New York, you have to make an arrest on a felony.
However, that they are giving the department discretion for the allocation and use of, is it possible
So
to arrest
if-
every single one of those
In that
protesters?
case, then,
They
do we
would have to-
challenge the Constitution of us being a nation of laws? If laws are discretionary to enforce when you feel like them, are we really a nation of laws?
What they're saying, though, is like resource allocation should be left to the discretion of the leader.
And I understand.
Let's just say, for argument's sake, that protest would have called, like even New York City, during these major unrest and rioting that was going on, they were pulling from the outer boroughs.
Right.
And leaving them bare in these local
Well,
precincts.
the New York City protest, this department didn't prepare for.
Right.
This
I agree
department
100%.
understaffed. We have 35,000.
I think intentionally,
police-
too.
Absolutely, we didn't prepare for it. But at the
But
end
what
of
the court's saying is, in that scenario, we can't mandate you to take every available police officer to go there. We can't. That's a resource allocation discretionary act that you have the right to use. The remedy for that is not through the courts, it's through the voting booth. We don't like what you did, you're out.
But by the time you get to the voting booth,
Everything will be destroyed.
the city can be burnt to the ground.
I
That's
mean, we're
why-
talking about a year and a half from now.
But here's what I wanted to talk about accountability. There are jurisdictions where you have elected sheriffs. They're accountable to the people.
Yeah.
They can now use their discretion as to how they want to enforce laws. That's a discussion we need to have. Is that something we want? An
We start electing police commissioners.
elected police commissioner. You're talking about the largest police
Well, to
commission,
be
police
quite
department
honest,
in the
the
country.
NYPD hasn't really seen any talented police commissioners in many, many years now.
But it would be a civilian, an elected civilian to be the police commissioner. Now, I mean, you could run for that. I mean,
Anybody can run for
anyone
that, but
could
that's the
run for
problem
that
with the
position.
sheriffs in the country, that some of them are completely incompetent. They were like bar owners, and suddenly overnight they became sheriffs of a given jurisdiction. This is not something that we want. We want somebody who is a commissioner who has
Well,
some
look,
background.
you
in
should
law
have an
enforcement,
understanding
right?
of what you're doing. It's like to run for district attorney and not be a lawyer.
Right, yeah.
You know, you can do that.
Or a practicing lawyer, like Melinda Katz. Although she's been a lawyer 30 years, she's
not
never
a practicing.
represented a client in court.
But
It's
she
just
still
outrageous.
has more insight than someone like myself who's not a lawyer.
Who doesn't
Or
have
somebody
that?
who has a bar owner.
Right. You have some. Right. Exactly. So in that
But
aspect,
I think
get.
there are plenty of qualified, like Eddie Hartnett, I think is a great commander and a great leader, and he was commissioner of Yonkers PD on our job. I think somebody like that would be a great elected official. You know,
But-
I don't know, it's a
but the
discussion we have to have,
election-
is there's
again,
pros
the
and cons
elections-
to that.
I've seen it in other countries because it was introduced over years in other countries. For example, in Poland, after they transformed from militia into police, they said, yes, now we're going to elect our local police chiefs. And again, you're walking into an corruption 101 because these elected officials are not really elected. People who have money support certain individuals.
Well, that's part of the
right?
process. It's
So that's part of the
campaign
process,
funds, you know.
campaign process. So you don't necessarily end up having the best and the brightest
Correct.
when you have them elected. So that's not
Well,
necessarily.
you're not always going to get the best and the brightest. It's just
won't.
not going to happen. But that's
Just
part of the election
in
process.
any
right?
elective process,
Right.
you know.
And it shouldn't
Yeah.
be where you need a certain specific qualification because you may eliminate people who are really just good leaders.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right, so you
Yeah.
eliminate
Yeah.
that also.
Yeah, absolutely. But
You know, on the topic of police chiefs and, you know, taking over cities, and Chief of Seattle, Carmen Best, just announced her resignation.
Right.
The fund in Seattle, 100 police officers, is going to be reduced, and they were cutting her salary. Now, as we were speaking earlier, she's the first African-American female police chief in the city of Seattle.
yes.
You're talking about reform. You want to balance the playing field. You want the people to start to implement change. You've achieved the highest ranking position in the city of Seattle, and this chief now resigns. Her reasoning in press conferences is that she doesn't like the disrespect being shown to police officers. Should she have resigned?
Absolutely. I think this is exactly what we need to see, and I actually tweeted on this yesterday that I bow to her. She displays integrity and courage. If police chiefs around the country and police commissioners said enough of this. Enough of this assault on the profession that is completely unjustified, that is violent, that destroys the fabric of our society. I think the mayors of this respective cities, some might have been happy and they would have appointed somebody else. But if that somebody else would step down, what do? As you said, police is the arm of the local government. You have to have your little army. If you don't have a leader for this army, you won't stay as a mayor for a long period of
They
time.
don't have an army because they don't allow it to be utilized.
Right.
So in
Resource.
referencing to what Maki is saying is, she made the right move to step down. Should she have stepped down and laid the responsibility on the mayor, if those are the real reasons? I find it very disbelieving that I stepped down because of the disrespect that's being shown to the police officers. If you're the chief, then restore the respect.
Yeah, that's
That's
easy to
my
do.
view, is-
It's ineffective as the chief commander. If
Well, to
you
me, you're
can't do
quitting.
that, I think they won't allow her
Then
to
she
do
should
that.
say that if they
Yeah,
won't allow her to
yeah.
do that. Should she not?
I
Should she
agree.
not lay the
I
blame where the
Yeah.
blame belongs?
But,
Well-
but I think there are steps in courage, right? You don't take almost like on continuum of force. There are steps. I think she did something unheard of so far. Resigning because of the disrespect for law enforcement. That's part of the reason.
Well, I
That's
think it's
one
part of the
part
reason, but you either have courage or you don't. I mean, you go to the plate, you're either gonna hit a homer or you're not. You got a city under siege. You've got cops being assaulted and they're being disrespected.
Well, disrespect includes assault, I guess.
It does, but
right?
then call it for what it is. Call it that I'm the chief, they're breaking the law, that mayor will not allow me to enforce the law. People are in danger. They lost, I'm aware of 2 homicides in that lockdown, city that they
But
had.
can you imagine?
And that
the
was on her
impact-
watch,
Yeah.
if you think about it.
But can you imagine the impact if like 20, 30 police chiefs around the country of the major cities step down? I think this would be a
Let me
serious
ask you this, because we
impact.
had this here in the NYPD. I believe it was the 4-6, the commanding officer. I
Step
think it was
down.
Brea was his name.
Yeah.
He just
A
said
student from John
finally,
Jay, actually.
not doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not doing
Yeah.
it.
But he stepped down and laid the blame where it was.
Yes, he
He
called it
had
out.
the courage to
But-
step down and call it for what it was.
Is that what we want them to do, or do we want them to go down swinging? Meaning,
Well, that goes back to
I'm
my,
going
What-
to
what you were
that
enforce.
goes back to my,
Yeah.
issue of what happens if police decided to just remove the mayor? I mean, we see this
But
happen in
this is
third
coup
world
d'etat.
countries.
Yeah, this is coup
But
d'etat
it-
that
but-
usually the military takes.
But is
care
there
of.
not a coup d'etat occurring in some of these cities toward our government?
Absolutely.
So how do you
Absolutely.
defend against a coup d'etat?
I'm not saying that wouldn't happen, but that is,
It's drastic.
It's
It's
yeah.
drastic, and I agree with you. We are a nation of laws, but there's a point where you need to establish law. So if, we really want to hope that doesn't happen, but then those chiefs should be enforcing that law and say to the mayor, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm enforcing the law. When you remove me, the
I'd
next
Next
rather
mayor will
that.
tell him you fired.
Okay, but then you have to, you gotta stand up. Listen,
Yeah.
we lost thousands of troops on the beaches of Normandy.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
They knew they were dying,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but they went for a greater cause.
Yeah.
Okay? So
You don't have this
they weren't
leadership
getting
today.
fired, they were dying.
Right, but you don't have this leadership today.
Well,
don't have
there,
this.
there's leaders out there. The question is who's going to do it?
I think you're right. I think to your point, rather than objecting to the order and resigning,
Defy the order.
object to the order and do what you think is right. Let them fire.
And then explain why.
yeah,
Then explain why.
exactly.
I've
mean,
been
at this
calling
point-
for that here in this department, and we just continue
You
to
know,
play chicken.
again, this was the philosophy in my life, standing up to certain individuals who I disagree with and they had the power of removing me. It's not a pleasant experience.
It's not.
And it's not just from the individual standpoint, because people look at you differently. Oh, you were removed or you were fired. There must be something there.
Well,
As
they-
opposed to I am saying enough. And I agree with you. She should have said enough because of the mayor,
And I'm
enough of the
quitting.
council.
But lay it
city
out.
you're
Yeah,
right.
I'm
But
resigning for
saying,
these reasons.
I'm saying, again, it takes a lot to be able to point a finger.
But you have to believe in something.
You do.
You
Yeah.
can't live in a house with no mirrors.
You're right.
You have to believe in something. And what I've been witnessing, and we've all been witnessing,
Sure.
across the country, is cowardice leadership across the nation.
horrible.
And we're seeing that.
Absolutely.
You know, when you allow innocent people to be murdered, to be beaten, you know, just the argument in Chicago, it's okay for us to go steal $60 million worth of goods and damage a city because you're insured. Well, I'm still the victim, so is the insurance companies. How about you behave as human beings?
And the quality of life
Right.
also is I'm destroying the city. I mean, you live in the city.
There are
It's
stores
your
here in
city.
Lower Manhattan that are still closed
Still
because
boarded.
Mayor de Blasio tied the hands of the police.
Yeah.
He tied the hands of the police. So, you know, who speaks for those people?
I think these are great issues, and, you know, I think we gotta use the courts more, we gotta attack.
But the
the
them.
courts are
courts,
closed.
the
The courts
courts
are-
are a failure.
Yeah, they
We
are.
have district attorneys that refuse, I think it was in Portland, 25,000, nope, maybe it was Chicago, 25,000 arrests that were not prosecuted.
Probably
in the city of
Chicago because of the level of crime.
25,000 arrests not prosecuted, dismissed.
Here
So
too.
we have dysfunctional district attorneys, and they are dysfunctional. The only one holding the line here is, in New York, is McMahon in Staten Island.
Yeah,
Judges that, you know, the laws have tied their hands. Some release, some don't release. We just released a rapist in the Bronx
Yeah.
just yesterday. So, you know, who speaks for the victim? Or should we just
Yeah.
all be prepared to become victims?
Unfortunately, the political remedy, the ballot box, is what's left for us.
But I
we-
heard somewhere that only like 10% of New Yorkers voted de Blasio in,
You're
right? It
100%
Yeah,
right.
700,000 votes out of the 1% of the registered voter that came out to vote, I believe it was. 1.5.
Wow.
Yeah.
What the
Yeah.
problem is that we've had that voter apathy, even to the point where people think that they're gonna be called for jury duty service if I vote and
No, no, I
register.
mean, I don't want
There's
to
so
do
many
that,
people
so-
that are circumventing that obligation, and it is an obligation it's a right.
It's about
a
your freedom.
privilege, but it's an obligation.
Right. It's-
We have to be heard and elect people who represent us, that represent our values and what we feel is important. That's why we do it. There has been so much voter apathy, but I think that is changing now, and I see that with a lot of the candidates that are coming forward for the first time.
We'll know comes November if people are concerned or if we're all going to be leaving the United States when it becomes a socialist country. That's what we're facing.
I
But you
don't
know, it's
think
not
what-
a socialist country. I
Not
mean,
yet.
I lived in socialist countries. That's not a socialist country.
But
That's a
somewhere it
country.
starts.
This is like Somalia right now. It's
Then it's
complete
worse.
and total disorder,
It
complete
is.
breakdown in values in the legal system. I think we really should not be saying socialist or even communist because I lived in a communist country as well. There was law and order. I mean, we don't want this type of law and order, but we certainly don't
We don't wanna
want
live in
this
Somalia either.
either.
Yeah.
We don't want this.
But I think that is by design what's happening, and we see it collectively when you take a step back and look at what they're doing. The closing of Rikers Island, the releasing of all these prisoners, the bail reform, which prohibits judges from using any discretion to hold anyone and set monetary bail. Then we have so bail reform, then we have discovery reform. Discovery reform is outrageous. 15 days they have to turn over everything. Grand jury minutes, where previously if you had a violent crime to get somebody to cooperate, oh no, don't worry, we'll never disclose your information
Or now they get to
unless
visit
you
the
went
crime
to
scene.
trial. They get to go to the victim's
to go to the victim's home.
They get their name,
But
address,
who's
phone
responsible
number.
for this?
Our elected officials.
We always hear elected officials.
No,
Who?
it's
Who's the
Cuomo-
elected
it's Cuomo
official?
This is a
de Blasio.
one-
Cuomo de
Cuomo de
Blasio.
This
Who
is
else
a
voted
one-
for it?
This is
Let
a
people know who's
one-party.
responsible for it.
That's the problem. It's a one-party state.
But when we say we should be naming names,
Yes.
I hear this all the time. It's elected officials. It was voted
yeah,
in.
yeah.
Who?
No.
Who did it? Start
Yeah.
labeling people.
But think about this, though. Bail reform, discovery reform, they're talking about parole reform now. If you are incarcerated for 15 years and you're at least 55 years old, you're parole eligible. That's the new law coming down. I have a client, 44 to life he's facing. So, a judge found, based on the crimes that he committed, that it warranted 44 to life. You're now saying as soon as he turns 55 and he's got 15 years in, we're going to look to release him. And that's the shift in our whole criminological approach. It used to be deterrence and retribution. You owe a debt to society. It's backwards looking. You caused a harm that you must pay for. This new shift is forward looking. Is this person going to reoffend?
Are we appeasing people? Does
We are.
appeasement work?
Appeasement doesn't work. Appeasement is not based on social science. Appeasement is not based on science. It's based on some sort of perception that if you are nice to somebody, they'll be nice to you. That's counter to all the evidence that we have in social sciences as far as criminal behavior is concerned. Right? So no, it sounds nice, but it's not empirically sound and valid.
In the case of what we're witnessing, we've been nice to anarchists, so they're only breaking X number of windows instead of all the windows in the city of Portland.
Well,
Because that's appeasement.
we know just from the reaction of the police, and I learned this very early coming on the job, where it was taught to us, don't let people treat you, inappropriately because they're going to think they could do it to the next cop. That's the logic here. When they start seeing this soft touch, they're like, hey, they didn't arrest
Well,
us
you
back there
just
in
brought
Brooklyn.
Fact into play here, because a year ago, we were watching NYPD officers getting hit with buckets of water.
Exactly.
Now, we're seeing them being hit with bottles, Molotov cocktails
Bricks,
thrown in their
bats.
cars.
Yeah.
And who's responsible for that?
Well, they're not being
No, but
prosecuted.
who's responsible for that? Who's responsible for allowing that to happen?
The mayor, number one, he's our chief executive. They control the police department. And the the police department here is more than capable. We had, when I was on the job, the Tompkins Square Park riot, a citywide 85, and cops responded and restored order in hours.
Absolutely.
It was over.
And I've written about this last year when it happened with the water. And I thought back then that the mayor should have given the commissioner a direct order. Go after the individuals who did this, prosecute them, put them behind bars.
Exactly.
If this had been done back then, we wouldn't be seeing today.
See,
what
but
we're
that goes
seeing.
to what I was talking about. That's deterrence. That's deterrence.
There's
When you take that
consequence
action
for
and
your
people look at
behavior.
it and say, I don't want that to happen to me.
It's individual and general
That
deterrence.
deters crime.
Individual and general, because I bet you an amount of money that the same individuals who were throwing buckets of water at the cops back then were not arrested, are throwing Molotov cocktails at the cops today.
Right.
Because you escalate.
And then that goes to incapacity and selective incapacity.
Absolutely.
Let's take these people out who've already demonstrated they won't live by society's rules. They act in violent behavior. Let's selectively
Or we
remove
file a
them.
lawsuit to get equipment so that the police will not harm me, right?
It's
And that's to
outrageous.
the point
And
that
they're
this
actually
is
calling it a protest tax. It's a tax on peaceful protesters who now have to buy this protective gear to go out and protest. It's ridiculous. It really is, because we all know at some point when you cross the line, the police will announce. I see it here in the NYPD. They have recordings that they play. You are ordered to disperse.
But nobody
That-
listens to this because
when
there are
you
no
defy
consequences.
that,
No
listen, now they have a right to use force to remove you.
Joe, does mounted units work in?
Absolutely. I've seen it. Absolutely.
Mounted units, do they work?
You know what? I give you an example from Israel because it was very effective, still is effective. Forget the mounted units. Water cannons. Works beautifully.
You're never gonna see that happen.
Beautifully.
Yeah.
Water cannons with dye, with blue dye that doesn't get off your outfit. Beautifully.
You will never see dogs
not?
or one.
No,
I was just gonna say
You
dogs.
will never see that here
What-
because there's going to
because-
be
There's too much
the
history.
issue of
that-
racism that's gonna attach back into the
I
case
see
of
more
Alabama.
white people out
But
there
the
than
media
anybody
is going to
else.
take that and turn it right into racism. And is that better than using horses? I agree with you.
Absolutely, it's better.
Is
It's
it-
less invasive. It's
Absolutely, less force.
less
right?
force,
But they're not gonna do
absolutely.
that because no one will have the courage to defend.
Well, again, we go back to courage and leadership, right? And tactical approach to policing. How do you control crowds? How do you contain crowds. There is science out there. Nobody is reaching. And I always said it for years. If police departments, including NYPD, were listening more to social scientists who were doing research on how to control dangerous situations. I have a colleague who does this in the Netherlands. He's a PhD who works on this for years, how to control crowds. Tons of great ideas that they have there. They started with the soccer hooligans, and because they were very dangerous there. Nobody was looking at this. Nobody was looking at this. Nobody was using these best practices. And right now, we are paying the price for this because it's either what?
Police work has a need for force. That's the bottom
Oh,
line.
that's
Everyone goes to the
that's
barbecue,
all.
enjoys the sausage, no one wants to
Yeah.
watch how it's made. At the
Yeah,
end of the
that's
day,
all.
everyone wants to watch TV shows, but no one wants to see the ugly side of police work. And when it happens, it's the police's fault.
Yeah.
Big caption, resist and arrest.
Yes.
And that is an issue that we never really talk about.
Resisting arrest and the glorifying of the
Of the
resisting and
resisting arrest.
protest. There may be people
glorifying
who,
of looting, glorifying of crime.
but I watch these
Glorifying
videos
of
on
violent
social media
crimes.
of like simple car stops, and people are rolling down the window a quarter of an inch. What is it you
Yeah.
want? What do you want? And they're fighting from the
Defiance, total
beginning.
defiance,
That
total
will
defiance.
only lead to dangerous, hazardous conduct that will come from
Have you had an
that.
opportunity to watch the body cam video of the George Floyd incident?
I watched a portion of it. I didn't watch the full thing. But I remember when this first came down, I read the criminal complaint, which was based off of that body camera. And yeah, he was resisting, and they were more than patient with him to try to get him to comply. So yeah, it was.
Did you have the opportunity to see the video?
I saw portions. I didn't see the whole thing. I understand that he was resisting resisting arrest, but to me, it's about training. They could have handcuffed him and incapacitated him in a different way. I didn't like what I saw.
Believe
No, I didn't like what I
Greg
saw.
Kelly on Newsmax just ran about 6 minutes of body cam video.
Huh.
And when you say it's about training, the Minneapolis procedure guide for training has the wording in it to place the knees on the neck. It's right in the training manual.
Which should not be there.
Okay,
Which should not be there.
but even though it should not be there,
Yeah.
Right.
and you have an African-American chief, I
Yeah.
believe, and a mayor. This has been
Yeah,
there since
but
2012.
Nobody looks at training manuals after they
But-
leave the academy. Nobody does. And this is part
But
of the problem.
we can't talk about training and say we're not going to look at the manual.
Yeah, no,
It can't go both
I
ways.
want to point out that I looked at, early on, somebody pointed out to me, there's another police officer that sent it to me, their essentially their patrol guide. I think it was more of an administrative guide. It looked like an actual codified statute where it allowed the submission, by doing that with the neck, and also it actually called it unconscious
Yes,
submission,
Which is-
where you're allowed to
Correct.
render the
Look,
person unconscious.
Should it be in there? No,
Should be.
But it was in there.
But the thing is, there's a whole issue that's taking place that I honestly think that when this unravels, there's going to be a lot more to that story that none of us.
Absolutely.
Sure, but again, looking at the SOPs and patrol guys throughout the country for 2 decades now, there are outrageous things out there. It doesn't mean that it's okay.
But
Does
look
mean
at,
But
that
then
it should
shouldn't
be
the chiefs and the police
I think that
commissioners-
the mayors and the police commissioners
should
should
be
be
held
fired.
responsible.
They should be
be
fired,
right.
not the cops who are
I
right
compare
now.
that to Atlanta, where the district attorney deemed that taser to be a deadly weapon.
Absolutely.
So how do you
that's
punish
completely
these police officers when you're telling
But that
them?
same district attorney, a week earlier, 2 weeks earlier, deemed just the opposite.
No,
College students.
no, he was accusing the cop of using deadly
Deadly
physical
weapon,
force.
but it was reversed
Right,
2
right.
weeks earlier,
Yeah,
right? Same district attorney, who I believe is up for election, and
Yeah.
there's some kind of issue taking place with that.
which is,
Yeah.
again, that whole issue of the elected versus appointed. I mean, I think a district attorney should be elected and accountable to the people, but, just like judges. Judges are elected, some are appointed by the mayor, but judges are elected. I just have a problem with that. A judge going out raising funds, campaigning, and
Well, a judge should truly be independent. To be elected, you
the only
have
way they do
obligations.
that with us to have our judges independent, they give them such long terms, 14 years for a Supreme Court judge. That gives you the independence that you don't have to. You're not running every 2 years like our state assembly or state.
Well, what
senate.
you should just do is have greater accountability, where if a judge does do something inappropriate, that there is significant accountability rather than just the typical letter in your folder type thing that they like to do with them.
I actually like the federal judges are appointed by the president, the chief
And
executive,
confirmed.
lifetime, confirmed by the
confirmed,
Senate, but
right.
lifetime, so they can exercise their
Right.
true understanding of the law, if that's what they're doing. And a lot of them, I think, do,
But this
but
is the point. You said if that's what they're doing, being elected for life, if you're not the right person, doesn't mean that you're going to do the
they
right
can be
thing.
impeached like any other elected official can be.
It's
They
so
can be
hard to
impeached.
impeach somebody.
You're right.
It's
You're
so
right.
hard.
I think there should be greater accountability for judges, particularly lifetime appointees. But I don't want it too tight where now they have to, if they go against the political winds, like right here, somebody was now going to rule on that federal lawsuit, and they're afraid of the mounting pressure from the left that they're going to acquiesce and say, okay, yeah, the city should provide that. No, I don't want
should
that.
step down.
I want their full interpretation of the Constitution and how it applies here. That's why we want to protect them. So it's a balance. What you're saying is true, that if they are acting outside of the law and not ruling according to the law, they should be able to be removed, like a competency removal. But going beyond that is dangerous. Look at our Supreme Court. Most of our decisions in the Supreme Court are majority.
Yeah.
They're not unanimous. A lot of them are 5-4, 6-3. These are our best legal scholars that are up there deciding, and reasonable minds can differ on certain interpretations. So you can't just hold them to a tight, rubric. If you don't rule this way, you're going to be removed. We want them to have that discretion.
I agree with you. I do. We're going to have to wrap it up, so we want to thank you for watching more to the story, and we'll see you again next week.